Beyonce didn't get to $1 billion. $1 billion got to her, and the man who watched it happen up close, before the gold dresses, before the white robes, before the so-called ancestor talk, is finally telling the part nobody wants on the internet. He worked next to Jay-Z. He sat in those rooms. He saw the door that gets opened when the talent is no longer enough. And what he just said about that door, about who walks through it, about what they leave on the other side, is already pulling the wig off Hollywood in real time. So forget what you've heard. Forget the documentaries. Forget the think pieces. Forget the fan accounts arguing in the quote tweets at 3 a.m. Tonight, we're not arguing whether the occult is real. We're arguing why every person at the very top of the food chain keeps tripping over the same colors, the same symbols, the same rituals, the same dinners, the same hand signs, the same eye in the same circle on the same merch. Because once you see the pattern, you can't pretend it's a coincidence. And the pattern just got dragged into the daylight by somebody who used to be inside the network and has nothing left to lose by talking. His name doesn't matter as much as his timeline. He met Jay-Z in 1991. He was working with him in 1999. That's not a fan. That's not a podcaster guessing from a Wikipedia page. That's a man who was in the building before Beyonce was a household name, before the Hova nickname turned into a religion, before the Empire had a logo, before the streaming era turned every artist into a franchise. He's sitting there saying what most people in that industry will never say out loud while they still have a paycheck on the table, an NDA in a drawer, and a publicist who calls them every Monday. He says, in those early years, the occult wasn't part of the conversation. There were no rituals, there were no satanic dinners, there were no whispered pacts in the back of a tour bus. It was just music. It was just hustle. It was just two ambitious men chasing the same thing every artist chases. So when people ask him, was Jay-Z always like this? His answer is precise. He says, no, not back then. Back then it was clean. Back then it was normal. Back then the only thing on the table was a demo tape and a dream and a fight to be heard. And that one sentence is louder than any conspiracy video on the internet. Because if it was clean back then, and it isn't clean now, the question isn't whether something happened. The question is when it happened, and what it cost, and who was in the room when the trade got made, and whether the man on the other side of the table is still alive, still collecting, still smiling at industry parties with a glass of something dark in his hand. He says it the way only somebody who's been close to power says it. He says, to get to that level, you don't just need talent, you need a network. And that network isn't a record label, it isn't a manager, it isn't a publicist with a Rolodex, it isn't a billionaire mentor in a black turtleneck. It's something else. It's a circle of people who run the realm, his words, who decide who eats and who doesn't, who blows up and who quietly disappears, who gets the magazine cover and who gets buried under a release date that nobody promotes. He calls them Satanists. He calls them witches. He calls them warlocks. He says it without flinching because he's not selling a book. He's confessing. And here's the line that should shake every dreamer watching. He says there are thousands of artists out there with as much talent as Beyonce. Thousands, maybe more. Singers who can outsing her on a Tuesday. Dancers who could outwork her on a Wednesday. Songwriters with 10 times the catalog she'd ever admit to. And not one of them is sitting on $1 billion. Not one of them is headlining a stadium tour with their face on the side of a building. Not one of them has a husband walking around with $3 billion worth of so-called luck. So either the universe just randomly decided to elevate two specific people out of an entire planet of gifted humans, or there's a door, and they walked through it, and they paid for the ticket, and the ticket was not paid in dollars. He's not guessing. He's describing the door. He's describing who controls it. He's describing what they want in exchange, and he's saying it from the position of a man who saw it from the staff entrance, watched the bouncer wave certain people in, watched the bouncer turn certain people away, and watched the ones who got waved in come out the other side different humans than they walked in as. This is where it stops being abstract. This is where the receipts start sliding across the table. Because there's a former warlock who already broke this down on camera. And his analysis is what nobody in the fan accounts wants to repeat. He says the gold dresses aren't fashion. The white robes aren't a vibe. The yellow set in the rainstorm visuals, the moments where she suddenly switches her wardrobe mid-show in front of 70,000 people, those aren't styling decisions made by a creative director with a mood board and a Pinterest. They're invocations. Each color, he says, calls a different spirit. Each fabric, each stone, each placement is a whisper to a specific entity. Yellow for one, white for another, red for a third. The hair down, the hair up, the water, the smoke, the wind machine, none of it random. All of it pointed at something that doesn't have a body, but has a name. That's the part that breaks people. That's the part where the comment section goes quiet for a second. Because once a viewer realizes they were clapping along to something they didn't understand, there's no unringing that bell. You can't watch the visual album the same. You can't watch the halftime show the same. You can't watch the Grammys, the awards, the tributes to the tributes the same. The colors stop being colors. The colors start being a language. And the language isn't speaking to you. It's speaking through you. It's borrowing your eyes. It's borrowing your ears. It's borrowing your voice every time you sing the chorus on the way to work without thinking about the lyric. People love that word, ancestors. It sounds warm. It sounds rooted. It sounds proud. It comes pre-packaged with grandmother energy and incense and afternoon light through a kitchen window. And nobody questions it because it dresses itself up in heritage. But the man on this interview pulls the rug out from under the soft framing. He goes straight to Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 through 12. He reads it slow. No diviners, no fortune tellers, no interpreters of omens, no mediums, no necromancers, no one calling on the dead. The text says these things are an abomination, and he's looking at the camera saying, "That's not me, that's the book. Take it up with the book." Then he turns the lens on the culture. He says people walk around with tarot cards in their purses now. People are pulling up their birth charts before first date. People are asking total strangers what their rising sign is before they ask what their last name is. People are talking to spirits and calling it self-care. People are pouring water for ancestors and calling it tradition. People are buying crystals at the airport and calling it travel-friendly spirituality. He says when Beyonce goes on a stage and speaks to the dead, she's not paying respect. She's tapping a frequency. And the frequency, he warns, has a price. The frequency does not work for free. The frequency keeps a tab. And the moment you accept that the language of the ancestors has been quietly weaponized into something else, the entire tone of modern pop culture shifts. Suddenly, every fashion choice on a red carpet looks like a wardrobe drop in a ceremony. Suddenly, every concert with strobes and chanting feels less like a show and more like a service. Suddenly, the word fan and the word follower stop meaning marketing terms and start meaning something heavier. Suddenly, the goosebumps you felt at the bridge of that one song aren't just goosebumps anymore. Suddenly, the tears you cried at the encore aren't just tears anymore. Suddenly, the tattoo on your wrist is not just a tattoo anymore. He brings up the moment most people forgot. 2013. Picasso Baby, a bare white gallery, a crowd lining the walls, cell phone cameras held high. Jay-Z on his feet for hours, rapping the same song over and over like a loop in a sleep study, his voice going hoarse, his eyes going somewhere else. And then she walks in, Marina Abramovich, the performance artist who has spent a lifetime drawing fire about what she really practices. She comes face to face with him. She places her hands on his shoulders. They press their foreheads together. They start to spin, slowly, smiling, eyes locked, like two children playing a game neither of them learned in kindergarten. He says he watched that clip and felt something come off the screen. He said it like the air changed. He said it like he could not believe people were just retweeting it as art. The internet noticed. People wrote articles, people sent their pastors links, people showed it to their grandmothers, and their grandmothers shut the laptop. The pressure got loud enough that Marina herself had to give a statement to The Guardian. Quote, "I am an artist, not a Satanist," which, to him, is the kind of denial that only happens when the rumor is already at the gate, climbing the fence, and pulling out a flashlight. And the question that lingers is the one nobody on the entertainment news loop wants to actually ask. If it was just art, why did the air feel different? If it was just art, why did the person on the receiving end of the laying on of hands keep climbing while everyone around him kept falling? If it was just art, why was the woman in the middle of it forced to publicly explain herself in a national newspaper? Coincidence is a comforting word until you stack 5 of them on top of each other and they start to look like a staircase. This is the part that turned my stomach the first time I heard it. He references a testimony, a woman named Marcella, Dominican Republic, former Satanist. She talks about her first initiation. There's a dinner. There are no candles, no robes, none of the things Hollywood put in your head from a decade of bad movies. There's just a table. There are people who look like people. They look like neighbors. They look like coworkers. And then they bring out the dish. A human hand, raw, skin still on it, fingers still curled, and they put it in front of her like it's a piece of fruit at a garden party. She didn't want to eat. She tried to refuse, and she says the spirits inside her took over her arm. She says the people across the table told her, plain English, "You eat or we eat you." So she ate. And after that, she says, the free will was gone. That's what these covenants do, the man on the interview explains. That's what people don't understand when they think this stuff is metaphor. The metaphor stage is where the door opens. Past the door, it isn't a metaphor anymore. It's a contract, and the contract enforces itself through your own body. Your hands move without your permission. Your mouth opens without your permission. Your name signs the line in your own handwriting, and you don't remember picking up the pen. Now layer that on top of the question that started this whole thing. How does a woman from Houston end up with $1 billion while her husband sits on 3? How does a couple stay at the absolute top of every list while every other artist in their lane gets passed around like a hot potato, dropped, picked up, dropped again, replaced by the next pretty face who's willing to do the next pretty thing? He's not saying they ate a hand. He's saying the door is the door. And once the door is open, the cost is rarely the cost the public sees on the receipt. Then he drops the line that nobody on TikTok has fully unpacked yet. He says, 2 weeks ago, I cast a demon out of a woman over video. A real session, a real deliverance. Quebec, Canada. He has it on camera. He says the demon spoke, and the demon said where it was from. The Zulu nation. He pauses. He repeats it. He goes, "Do you understand what you're hearing right now?" And he traces the line. He says hip-hop didn't start as just music. He says certain pioneers crossed certain waters, picked up certain practices, brought back certain rhythms, and grafted them into a beat that the whole world now dances to without ever asking what the rhythm was originally calling. He drops a name, Africa Bambaataa. He says, go look it up. He says when you sing along, you co-sign. He says when you let the chant inside your house, you let the chant inside your house. He says you don't need a robe, you don't need a candle, you don't need a sigil drawn on the floor. You need a speaker, a song, and a willing mouth. And the contract is signed in your own voice, without you ever realizing you signed it. That is what he's calling, on camera, the most successful occult operation in modern history. Not a temple, not a coven, a radio station, a streaming app, an algorithm that knows your bedroom better than your mother does. He doesn't speak in fairy tales. He talks about the smaller version he lived inside, the compromises, the men who called him brother and stabbed him in the same week, the Leviathan spirit, his words, that runs the back rooms, pride, ego, narcissism, cruelty dressed up as confidence. He says you cannot fly that high without the air getting thin. He says you cannot stand that close to that much money without the smell of the deal getting in your clothes, your hair, your skin, your kids' clothes when you hug them at the door. And he wasn't even at the top. He was at a fraction, a small fraction, and he still saw enough to walk away holding his soul with both hands and never look back at the building. So scale that up. Scale it up to private jets. Scale it up to stadium tours. Scale it up to net worths with a B at the end. The level of compromise required to maintain that altitude isn't measured in interviews. It's measured in things you don't get to keep when you sign. Sleep, peace, children's innocence, marriage privacy, the ability to walk into a grocery store and just be a person. Sometimes the marriage itself, only kept on paper because the brand is worth more than the bond, and the lawyers worked too hard to draft the joint venture for love to take it apart. He's looking at the camera and saying plainly, none of this is free. Nothing at that height is free. Not even the things that look like they came with the package. He doesn't teetope. He says the Epstein files dropped. He says the names came out. He says nobody is in a cell. He says the silence after the documents is louder than the documents themselves. And he frames it the way only somebody who has actually thought about it can frame it. He says when the system protects the system is the ritual. The blood, the children, the islands, the planes, the lists, the masseuses, the receipts, the flight logs that read like a who's who. He says we keep treating it like a true crime mystery with a final episode coming next Tuesday. He says it's not a mystery. He says it's a sacrament for a religion that doesn't have a name on the door but has buildings in every major city on Earth and a budget bigger than most countries. And once that frame lands, the entertainment industry stops looking like an industry. It starts looking like a clergy. Awards as ordinations, stage shows as services, albums as scripture, music videos as visual prayers, press tours as missionary work, the red carpet as the procession, the after party as the after service, and the audience, the ones with the wristbands, the ones screaming the words, the ones tattooing the lyrics on their ribs in cursive, the audience as the congregation that pays the tithe in attention every single time their favorite drops a track at midnight.
This is the twist. This is the part that flips the whole thing. Because for 10 acts straight, this story has been a horror story about who's at the top and what they paid to stay there. But the man on this interview and the host he's talking to do not end on horror. They end on a name. They say the only way out of this kind of contract isn't legal, it isn't financial, it isn't a rebrand, it isn't a Netflix documentary where you cry on camera and apologize to a journalist. It's Jesus. They say the only thing that breaks a blood covenant is a stronger blood covenant. They say there are A-list names quietly Googling deliverance at 3 a.m. on a burner phone. They say there are stars who have been having dreams they can't explain. They say there are entertainers who would walk away tomorrow if they could find a door back out. And here's the part the algorithm doesn't expect. They're praying for them. Not roasting them, not canceling them, not screenshotting their old tweets. Praying. He talks about a fasting chain that runs every single day. He talks about thousands of new people joining in just the last month. He talks about a prophetic dream where specific celebrities, names he won't drop on camera, find their way to a testimony exactly like the one he's giving right now and use it as the off-ramp. He says the off-ramp exists. He says the door swings both ways. He says nobody at the top is so far gone that they can't be brought home. And in a culture that loves to cancel, that mercy lands like a slap to the side of the face. Now the camera turns. Now the heat comes back to your couch. Because he's not just talking about Beyonce. He's not just talking about Jay-Z. He's talking about you. He's saying every concert ticket is a ballot. He's saying every stream is a stamp. He's saying every lyric you let inside your living room is a guest you invited without checking the ID. He's saying every playlist is a guest list. He's saying every algorithm recommendation is a knock on a door and you keep answering it with your eyes closed. And the host echoes him. The host says you cannot be in your Bible on Sunday and in their playlist on Monday and pretend the two are not in the same room arguing over you for the rest of the week. And then he says the line that snaps the whole video shut. He says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, not lack of effort, not lack of love. Knowledge. The information, the eyes opening, the pattern showing up where you used to see fashion, the frequency showing up where you used to hear bass." He says the moment you have the knowledge, you are responsible with what you do next. And after a video like this, you cannot unhave it. You can pretend, you can scroll past, you can put the phone down and laugh, but the knowledge is in there now. It has a seat at your table. It will be sitting next to you the next time the song comes on in the car and the bass drops and your shoulders move on their own. He ends with a prophecy that sounds bigger than entertainment. He says the altars are coming down, not just hers, not just his, all of them. He says the politicians, the athletes, the executives, the pastors who sold the pulpit, the influencers who sold the algorithm, the producers who sold the basement, the executives who signed the checks that paid for the basement. All of it is being walked into the daylight on a clock the world did not set. He says darkness has never beaten light. He says it never will. He says the only question now is which side of the lamp you want to be standing on when the room finally fills up and the whole house gets bright. And that's where the video ends and the conversation in your head begins. Because if even 10% of what this man said is real, the gold dresses aren't gold dresses. The hand sign isn't a hand sign. The ancestor talk isn't ancestor talk. The Jehovah nickname isn't a nickname.
The sleeping giant of the catalog isn't a catalog, and the question is no longer whether something is going on at the top of the food chain. The question is, now that you know, what are you going to keep playing in your car on the way home from work tomorrow morning when nobody is watching but you? I'll say what he didn't say. The reason this story is hitting the way it's hitting is because the audience finally outgrew the spectacle. There was a window where the wigs, the wind machines, the choreography, the smoke, all of it was enough. That window is closing. People are starting to feel the air shift the same way he felt it shift watching that clip in 2013. People are starting to ask why the visuals always involve the same elements. The same eye, the same horns dressed up as crowns, the same animal symbolism, the same fire, the same cages, the same pyramids, the same single-eye close-up at the climax at the music video. People are starting to notice that the artists who go silent stay silent forever, and the ones who play along get a tour and a fragrance line and a Vogue cover and a documentary on a streaming platform that already paid for the favor before it streamed. People are connecting the dots in real time, on their phones, in their cars, in their comments, and not even the biggest publicist in Los Angeles can catch every dot before it lands on the floor of the cutting room. So if you came here looking for a verdict, here's mine. I'm not telling you Beyonce eats hands. I'm not telling you Jay-Z signs documents in a basement under candlelight. I'm telling you what the man on the interview told the host. There is a door. The door is real. The door has a price. And the people standing closest to it for the longest are not standing there by accident. And they are not standing there because their voice is prettier than yours. And they are not standing there because they manifested it on a vision board with magazine cutouts. They are standing there because somebody, at some point, said yes to something the rest of us would never agree to. And until they say a different yes to a different name, the door stays open and the room stays full and the music stays playing and the colors stay coded and the babies in the front row keep absorbing a frequency they could not consent to even if you handed them the paperwork. Hit the like if you felt that in your chest. Subscribe if you want the next one in your face the second it drops. Drop a comment with the lyric, the music video, the red carpet moment, the awards show stunt, the halftime moment that finally made you realize something was off. I read them, I respond, I'm building a list, because the next video on this channel pulls another thread, and the thread pulls another door, and behind that door is a name even bigger than the two we just spent 20 minutes on. A name you grew up watching, a name your parents trusted, a name your kids stream every single night before bed. Stay close, stay prayed up, stay sharp. Keep your eyes open and your playlist clean. The light is on, the room is filling up, and we are just getting started. And the only thing left to decide tonight is which side of the wall you want your name written on when the lamp finally lands and the whole house wakes at the same time.